Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Now for the pushback. The deep state's war on Donald Trump enters new territory, and this time the focus is on what the Obama administration may have done to sabotage Trump's transition team and the new administration. Now it's Trump versus Obama. Cross-talking Trump's pushback, I'm joined by my guest, Bruce Fein in Washington. He is a constitutional lawyer and a former Associate Deputy Attorney General under President Ronald Reagan. In Las Vegas, we have Robert Barnes. He is a trial lawyer in criminal and constitutional law. And in London, we cross to Alexander Mercouris. He is a writer on legal affairs, as well as the editor-in-chief of the Duran.com. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Alexander Mercouris, if I can go to you first in London here. My sense is there's ample evidence now that there has been a concerted campaign by the outgoing administration to sabotage the new administration. We've seen this with leaks that destroyed the career of Mr. Flynn, that is putting a lot of pressure on the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. And now we have another claim from the other side of the aisle, as it were, in this battle. We have a sitting president saying the outgoing president was somehow involved or had knowledge of himself being, Donald Trump being wiretapped. And a lot of evidence hasn't been really shown on any sides here, except for the fact that they don't want to go after the leakers. Maybe they will. Go ahead, Alexander in London.
Well, there's been very little evidence of any kind, but I think it's very difficult to avoid the impression that there has been a pushback by the previous administration against the existing one. There was a report recently in the New York Times which said that all kinds of intelligence was spread all across the bureaucracy to make it easier for people to leak and to make it more difficult for the present administration to suppress it. So that strongly suggests an attempt by the previous administration to undermine the present one, rather than to work with it, as one would expect during a period of transition. So I don't think there's any doubt about that, and I don't think there's any doubt either that relations between the people of the two administrations are now completely toxic.
Yeah, Bruce, can you speak to that? I mean, because what you have here is we have elements of the bureaucracy that seem to be very intentional in their desire to damage the sitting president, actually giving some kind of paralysis to his administration, because he's constantly having to react to these things. But at the same time, Donald Trump doesn't do himself some favors as well. Go ahead, Bruce.
Well, that's true. I mean, the leaks are coming out not only of the bureaucracy, but out of the White House itself. And leaks have been coming out of the White House ever since I arrived, 50 years ago. It's chronic, and it's very, very difficult and seldom to identify who the leakers are. But I want to place this in a larger context. I don't think it's so much Trump and Obama. In the United States, we still have a multi-trillion-dollar military-industrial counterterrorism complex. And the purpose of that complex is to find enemies to justify the budget and their stature. And it's not just Russia. We're colliding with China. We're colliding in the Middle East. We're escalating our presence in Afghanistan and Yemen. It's all around the world. Russia is simply one of a larger tapestry, which is, in my judgment, even more damaging. And Trump comes in, he's not part of the establishment, and they just worry, well, gee, he said some things that maybe NATO ought to defend itself, and maybe other countries should defend themselves because I'm only president of the United States, and I'm not president of the world, whereas the military-industrial complex believes it governs the whole world. We're the locomotive, everybody else is the caboose. And that's the larger dynamic behind here that we shouldn't lose sight of. That's really what's propelling this.
Robert, can you speak to that? Because it does seem that the swamp wants to be left alone. It doesn't want to be drained. It likes the status quo. In President Obama, he was very pliant to their desires and needs and wants. I mean, it was a liberal Democratic president, and he surrounded himself with neocons. One has to wonder if he was just completely divorced from his foreign policy. Donald Trump is a threat to all of that. Go ahead, Robert.
Oh, precisely. Is basically a parallel track of two different things happening at the same time. As Alex mentions, you have sort of the Obama administration or its holdovers and its former appointed officials engaging in a campaign of sabotage in a sort of shadow government effort against Trump. But at the same time, as Bruce mentions, you have a parallel effort of the deep state and its entrenched interests that are threatened and challenged by Trump that are also waging war on Trump. So he's facing these parallel actions of this corrupted deep state that Obama got into bed with that are waging a campaign of sabotage with illicit leaks and what appear to be illegal intercepts even during his campaign season.
You know, Alex, one of the things I find really most disturbing is that there seems to be very little interest on part of the establishment and the mainstream media to really go after the leakers. I mean, these are very, very serious charges here. I mean, it gets down to, in very simple English, is that the state can get information on you and it can destroy you politically, publicly. The state should not be doing that, okay? There are certain circumstances which the state wants to know what someone is saying and get the proper legal requirements. But, I mean, in this case here, this looks like it was political and it was personal. Go ahead.
Well, can I just say something about that? Because we have two American constitutional lawyers here, and it seems to me that there's been a line crossed. Yes, leaking has gone on for a very long time in Washington. It happens in every capital. It happens in London, it happens in Washington. But for the first time that I can remember, a leak was used of classified intercept of a telephone conversation between a member of the incoming administration, that's to say General Flynn, and an ambassador, in order to destroy the career of that incoming official of the administration. Now, as I understand it, that is not just a serious violation of the law, it is also a very serious crossing of the line, because it means that the information the deep state, if you like, is collecting is being used in illicit ways to target individuals that it sees as dangerous. And it's particularly dangerous in this case because it seems General Flynn was not allowed to see the transcripts of these telephone conversations. He was asked to respond to them entirely on the basis of his memory. He made mistakes, which is not perhaps entirely surprising. And on the strength of that, his reputation was first destroyed in the newspapers, and eventually he lost his job.
You know, but it's very interesting to all of you. You know, General Flynn wasn't allowed to see the. Hang on, but he wasn't allowed. He wasn't allowed to see the transcript. But I bet you, my bottom dollar, the Washington Post got to see that transcript. Go ahead, Bruce, jump in.
Yes. I'm just going to say that there's nothing irregular, and the target here clearly was the Russian ambassador. It wasn't Mr. Flynn, and that's legal. Whether it's used properly is a different matter, but that's been true for 50 years or more, that we target foreign agents, and there's nothing wrong with being an ambassador, but in the eyes of the countries where he's not representing, that's a person who can be targeted. Now, I would want to say this as well with regard to leaks. At one time, it was viewed as heroic that we had Mark Felt deep throat. He was leaking out all sorts of information to the public, and after the fact, when it was revealed by Woodward and Bernstein, no one tried to describe him as a scoundrel. So, there are good leaks, bad leaks, but you're not going to expect the press, to denounce and try to hound their own sources. It's and they know what their sources will do with it. It's right.
Bruce,
Mr. Robert Novak, I want to just explain this if I could just a second here, and I appreciate it.
All right, go ahead.
Robert Novak said you don't criticize your sources. You don't criticize sources, and so the media is not going to go criticize the sources that are giving them the front page headlines. And I do think that Mr. Trump is letting himself be distracted. He needs to get his people in the bureaucracy if he can run it. He has all the Obama people. He has a half dozen people confirmed, and he's getting distracted, and it takes time to find good people.
Okay, Robert, let me go to you. I mean, we heard the analogy to Watergate, and I think this is good. But there's a difference between Watergate and what's going on now, is that Deep Throat was revealing wrongdoing, corruption. okay? And the leaks
except
about
there's actually a
Flynn,
caveat
but Flynn, they're just going after him personally, destroy his career and his good name. Okay, these are very different cases about how leaks work. Go ahead, Robert, in Las Vegas.
Absolutely. There's an analogous component, and there's a completely different component. The different component is that Flynn was entirely innocent, and I have one disagreement with Bruce. The FISA law is very conservative and constricted and limited and narrow about when you can record the conversation of a U.S. person, and in particular, what you can do with it when you find out you've recorded a U.S. person. You're not supposed to keep it. You're supposed to purge it. You're not supposed to share it or disseminate it. In fact, the law criminalizes that precise act. And yet clearly that's what happened. They shared it with everybody but the person that they should have shared it with, which was Flynn himself. Secondly, there is actually an analogous component with Watergate, which is what Woodward and Bernstein and Bradley and others covered up the identity of the Deep Throat, was because Deep Throat was actually a member of the deep state. He was part of the Hooverized FBI. He was someone who actually was the head of COINTELPRO. He was someone who had been running illegal sabotage campaigns against U.S. citizens for years. He was later indicted and convicted for that. And the reason why the media kept his identity secret was they didn't want to reveal to the world that they were in bed with the deep state to take out Nixon, because Nixon tried to de-Hooverize the FBI. Now, Nixon made plenty of mistakes, but the real reason he was actually railroaded out of office from an elected position was because he actually tried to do something good, which was de-Hooverize the FBI and clear it out of some of its more corrupted elements after J. Edgar Hoover passed away. So that's the one component that's actually analogous, is there's a history of the deep state believing it can take out a president of the United States by using a deep throat methodology. But that's this on steroids, and it's this with someone who has done nothing wrong at all except try to bring the country to a more peaceful place.
Okay, gentlemen, I'm going to jump in here. We're going to go to a short break. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Trump's pushback. Stay with our team. Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter LaBelle. To remind you, we're discussing Trump versus Obama. Okay, I want to go back to Washington, D.C. Bruce, you wanted to quickly respond to something that Robert said before we went to the break. Go ahead.
Yes, I was at the epicenter of the impeachment investigation of President Nixon. I was in the Office of Legal Counsel at the Justice Department at the time. And the critical elements, there were tapes that were disclosed by rulings of the United States Supreme Court. The president has an opportunity to argue one way or the other. They clearly had him stating that he was encouraging perjury and obstruction of justice and investigating where the funds came from to support the Watergate burglars. And that was what propelled his resignation. He actually didn't go forward with an actual impeachment charge because he resigned. And I'd also say that let's think about leaks with regard to Edward Snowden, which, of course, the Russians are quite familiar with, and we are as well. I think that here in the United States, there are many. I mean, I think that this disclosed wrongdoing, some of it didn't disclose necessarily wrongdoing. It was illegal. But transparency generally is the rule in a government that's self-governed, because the people need to know what their government is doing to decide one way or the other. And it's very difficult to argue that in advance you know whether a leak will reveal criminality or wrongdoing or not, because that's what an investigation is about. You don't sentence first, verdict afterwards.
Well,
anyway, I'm not trying to justify all of this, but transparency is critical. Sunshine is the best disinfectant.
Well, as we're speaking, gentlemen, the CIA is on the hot seat again because WikiLeaks has just released over 8,000 documents relevant to their spying techniques vis-a-vis the internet and media. So it's going to be a very interesting news cycle as we continue forward. Alexander, let me go to you. Another important element here. I mean, you know, I didn't expect to mention Watergate so much, but you know, you had an investigative journalist professionals in Washington watching the administration. Well, I've been watching MSNBC, and Mika Brzezinski is basically a mouthpiece for the deep state. I mean, the things that she actually says, it is for such an airhead to go on national television and say these things about an elected president, where we may find out that the outgoing administration was undermining a genuinely elected president of the United States. I don't care if you like him or not, or I don't care if you like the outcome or not. That's the fact. The media is playing a very corrosive role in all of this. Go ahead, Alex.
I think this is a key point, because President Nixon, what he did was a gross abuse of power, and much of it was outright criminality. As of this moment in time, there is no evidence of that against Donald Trump at all. He has been president of the United States for just over a month. During that time, there's no evidence that he has done anything that remotely amounts to impeachment. No evidence that he did anything remotely criminal whilst he was a candidate to be elected president of the United States. And yet, his reputation is constantly criticized, and he is being constantly undermined by leaks, even though so far there is nothing. Now, if we look at the other side of the picture, and it turns out that there was surveillance on him and on his associates organized by the previous administration, then I would say that was a much more serious matter, and perhaps one that repays more investigation and more attention from the media than the completely baseless accusations that have been made against Donald Trump so far.
Robert, if I can go to you, I mean, we even had James.
We had James. Misunderstands.
Okay, I was just going to say, James Clapper came out on NBC over the weekend when he was asked about the Trump team in collusion with Russia. His answer was emphatic: none. We found nothing. Nothing. Okay. I mean,
yes,
but my
Mr.
point
Clapper was the one who testified under.
My point in bringing this up is that you wouldn't notice that from the mainstream media. I mean, here's a guy that is in the know, okay? Okay, he lied to Congress before. I hope he wasn't crossing his fingers this time, okay? But, what the difference is here is we have a media has its own agenda here that is actually divorced from facts and reality. Go ahead, Bruce in Washington, jump in.
Yes, I'm not denying that, and I'm glad you pointed out that Mr. Clapper also, under oath, said that he wasn't collecting data on millions of Americans. And I'm not suggesting that means he always lies. But that's the nature of freedom, is that you've got to have transparency. Everybody has ulterior motives, and you want to pit ambition against ambition. Politics is not for saints, and if you can't stand the heat, stay out of the kitchen.
Sure.
And it's simply not true that simply because, you avoid criminality, that means you escape scrutiny. Like justice, like Caesar's wife needs to be above suspicion. And all administrations get unfairly treated. But one of the things about President Trump is if there is, serious non-frivolous allegations that the prior administration was doing things illegal, he's the president. He has his attorney general. So if he doesn't like the people at the Justice Department, he could fire James Comey tomorrow. He could fire it today before this program ends. Say, he's the president of the executive branch.
Okay.
And under our Constitution, he gets to ensure that everybody's responsive to his will.
Robert, if I can go to you in Las Vegas, one of the things I find puzzling, to be honest with you, over the weekend, Donald Trump, apparently like at 5:30 in the morning, remarkable for his age, to be up so early, is tweeting that, that the Obama, I'm paraphrasing here, the Obama administration basically bugged him, okay? But Bruce is absolutely 100% right. He is president of the United States. He has the power to declassify anything he wants. Now, I think it's really incumbent upon the president to come forward. He has the right to reveal these things. So he can just make a phone call and say, I want these files. And he can do it with what he wants. I expect him to do that. And I've even said in this program before, there's such a deficit of facts. I would like to see the president use facts, too. Go ahead, Robert.
Oh, absolutely. But as Alex mentioned earlier, in terms of the news story out of the New York Times, that basically they were talking about sharing information against Trump amongst the Obama surrogates and leftovers, as well as deep state members, to basically wage a war against Trump. But was also in those stories was how they were withholding information from Trump. So I think what's unique is here you have the President of the United States, who has members of the deep state doing illicit activities to sabotage his campaign, and then at the same time to take it a step further and also go to the step where they're willing to engage in illicit activity that they hide from him, so he's unable to actually be able to perform his tasks for the president.
You know, Alex, weigh in on that
well,
here,
I don't
because
think they can't hide that information.
Go ahead.
They can't hide that information. You know, that's theft. If they took all that information with them, you know, sort of a variation of Hillary Clinton doing private emails, that's theft of government property. I worked in the government. My files weren't my personal files. I worked for the government. They were entitled to them when I left. So everything that they did is available in the executive branch as we speak. And the president just orders you surveil X, Y, Z, the people who are suspected of ones that you've identified as sabotage. Let me take a look at those files. And if those people don't want to do it, he fires them and puts his own people in there. He is the president of the United States of America. And there's a unitary executive, meaning that he gets to control the people who work for him, whether you like it or not. If you don't, you can vote him out of office the next election. And that's what's puzzling. He needs to get his people in. And he's distracted all this time with things that are sucking up all the oxygen, and he's still really running an administration that's 99% Obama holdover.
That's right. Fair enough. Alexander, go ahead. Jump in, Alex. Go ahead.
No, what I wanted to say is that I think Bruce is making a very powerful point. Donald Trump is an amateur. He is not a professional politician. He has never held elected office. He has very little understanding of how the government bureaucracy in Washington works, and he's not operating it well. He is perhaps, one hopes, on a very steep learning curve, but he doesn't have a lot of time. He needs to get his act together, and he needs to listen to those who are prepared to advise him.
You know, Robert, I think one of the things, if I could get into Steve Bannon's mind, I'm sure he's got a strategy to strike back even harder. That's his nature. But there is the issue, and probably worry, is that we're going to get a number of investigations. We're going to have the White House doing investigations. You're going to have Congress doing investigations. You're going to have the various intelligence agencies doing investigations. And they're going to start bumping into each other here. And I wonder if this administration worries about that, because that will give the deep state, the Democrats and the media really what they want: paralysis. And all they'll keep saying is, see, he's incompetent. He shouldn't be in there. That's what they want. They want to stir this pot over and over again. And the White House needs to stop this and jump over it and recapture the narrative. And I'm not just saying this for Trump. I'm saying this is what whatever president is in the White House should be doing this when this kind of storm hits him. And particularly how the media has been behaving in a very, very hateful and very unhelpful manner when it comes to this president. Go ahead, Robert.
Absolutely, because what you have is two different things going on at the same time, and that you have effectively the reinvigoration of the HUAC, the House of Un-American Activities Committees, back from the 1950s, and they're running smear campaigns, neo-McCarthyite smear campaigns, using illegal intercepts and illegal leaks to achieve it and attain it. And at the same time, what they're trying to do is and then they're adding to that, like the worst thing Nixon did in terms of criminality, aside from the obstruction of the investigation, was he just had private people trying to spy on people. Here you have the deep state and Obama's holdovers, and maybe Obama himself, engaged using the NSA to spy on his political adversaries. That is unprecedented. So we are facing an unprecedented threat from the deep state and Obama's shadow government, and Trump has to immediately address it and address it head on. They're trying to prevent him from doing it by cordoning off a quote-unquote investigation. And you'll notice the media will say, if Trump tries to do anything about this, he's trying to interfere in the investigation. So they're trying to play games where they're trying to keep a portion of the deep state to continue to do their illicit activities without Trump's interference. But he's just got to break right through that, and that's why his tweets were the right thing to do, because he was hitting head on the precise issue that he needed to do.
Okay, gentlemen, you know,
I think that it's wrong-headed to try to suggest that.
Go ahead real quick, Bruce.
Congress is not there to investigate It's not a criminal investigative
That's right.
organization. It doesn't have the talent. It doesn't have the tools. That's not what its purpose is. And with regard in general to the issue of the president.
Bruce, I'm
and,
sorry. Bruce, I'm
the fact
sorry. I
is that
have
the
to interrupt
president's
you.
own-
Gentlemen, we've run out of time here. But my last thought is they should just cancel House of Cards because this reality show is a good replacement. Many thanks to my guests in Washington, Las Vegas, and in London. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, CrossTalk rules.
I love it.